So my Discord has been working on this Automaker app, which is working pretty well, except for there's some limitations. Right now, this is an Electron app wrapping a Next.js app, and there's an IPC protocol that basically sits between the Next app and Electron, so that Electron can run Claude code and run codecs and modify your file system. Now this works great, but it's definitely not the most flexible, because if we wanted to host Automaker on an actual like VPS or a VM somewhere and allow you to basically use it remotely, we don't have access to that because it's all Electron. Also, it's not the most secure because under the hood, this is just using Claude Code CLI and it's using Codec CLI. So those tools can basically modify your whole operating system, read every file, delete your root, and that's problematic. Now, in my opinion, this is the best experience that I've seen, like using an Electron app that can just call those things directly. But in reality, sometimes you do have to make trade-offs. And so one of the things that I'm going to share in this application is a technique I do when it comes to agentic coding to do huge refactorings. And so what I've been doing is trying to refactor this Electron app and pull out a separate REST API so that the Electron app can actually communicate with that REST API or maybe even a WebSocket server, so that the API can be hosted in a Docker container and you can use volume mounts to kind of protect the files and only give the Docker container access to the certain projects that you care about. It's a better form of isolation in my opinion, but it does add a lot of complexity. But this also allows me to deploy it to a VPS or deploy it anywhere else on a remote running service, and I can just kind of SSH into it and kick off agents. Now, in order to achieve this, we have to basically split the Electron app out into different interfaces and have those interfaces call like the API or versus call the actual like Electron core. And you can see here I have like over 1,000 changes. I think there's probably some git ignore files I need to update. But basically we took one giant Next.js application and we're splitting it up into a monorepo. So we have a Docker API, Electron app, a marketing app, a web app. So you can actually just run this without Electron. You can just load up localhost 8000 and start using the same thing. And then we have a bunch of libraries that are being used throughout all these. So we're kind of like sharing code, and we have the core agent logic, which is going to run on both the Electron app and also run on the web API, so that we have a centralized place that's handling, spinning up new agents, monitoring their statuses, and tearing them down. Now, this is still a work in progress, and it's probably going to take a lot more prompting and Claude Code to get this going, but I do want to show you the technique that I like to do with large refactorings because I do think it's super important. Now, before I dive into the technique, I do want to say I have an Agentic Jumpstart course. So if anything I'm talking about right now in this video is interesting, go check out my course. I'm basically teaching you how to use Claude Code and Cursor, how to do agentic coding. I have over 70 modules in over 11 hours of content where we're going to be talking about all the basics of agentic coding, like how to prompt, context engineering, MCP, Cursor, Claude Code, and more specifically, we are going to be building out a full stack web application hooked into Drizzle, ORM, Postgres. We have ShadCN, we have TanStack Start, my favorite framework. And so I think this is a very, very valuable course. So if you are interested in becoming like a 10x engineer, because these are the tools you need to become extremely fast and efficient, go check out my course, agenticjumpstart.com. Now, in order to achieve this refactoring, you'll notice I have a plan folder. This plan folder has a bunch of markdown files that basically are supposed to be iterated through one by one. And if you look through here, it basically has an overview file that tells us exactly what phases we're going to go through, in what order we need to go through them. And then also it kind of lists out the files of where they're kind of defined. Now, if you look at this plan, there's a README, and the README kind of points out how we're going to tackle these phases. So you'll see all the phases kind of listed out. And then you can drop this README into Claude Code or Composer 1 or Gemini 3, and then it'll kind of go through sequentially, asking you every step along the way if you want to continue on to phase 2 when it finishes phase 1. I will say, go check out Leon von Ziel, I think his name is. He has a bunch of agentic coding tutorials and full stack videos. I've been kind of watching his stuff and talking with him, so he has a lot of good ideas. And honestly, his last video kind of inspired me to make this video now. So if you do want more free tips and tricks of agentic coding, go check out Leon. I'll put the link in the description below. So to set up this whole plan folder, what I did was I loaded up like Gemini 3 or maybe as Opus 4.5 at this point. You just want something with a larger context window. And I would usually prompt it something like this. I have to refactor my Electron app to make it more extendable. I need to pull out all the logic that's dealing with, creating the agents and monitoring them into a core library so that I can use that inside not only the Electron app, but also like a web API, or even if I want to use it somewhere else. Find a way to split up my Electron app and my web application into smaller monorepo packages and apps so that I can easily run the exact same logic inside of Electron app, inside of a web app. I could deploy this to a VPS and have this run on a remote server, which hosts the UI, and I can start using it. I think the main thing you need to focus on is creating a lot of good adapters so that I can switch the Electron app to use a locally running core logic, or I can point it to some type of remote API or WebSocket server to handle this type of stuff. I want you to break this down into phases and create markdown files with a prefix of 00 or 01 or 02 so that I can iterate through these sequentially to implement this entire plan. Make sure you think as hard as you can to make sure this plan is thorough. Really inspect the code that we have now in the code base so that you create these plans with as much information as you can. Okay. And then I would kick something off like that. And then also I'd probably just tag in the folder here. So I'd probably be like, hey, just give me an empty folder. Like for example, I'd probably have an empty folder. I just tag it in. Okay. You kick this off. It's going to take some time, but then it's going to generate all these files. And it may have a README, it may not. It may have a initial overview point, it may not. But the point is that you'll have a bunch of different files, and then you can load up your favorite CLI tool. In my case, I'm going to use Claude Code, and what you can do is you literally just start dragging these files in. So you drag in the first file, you kick it off. Sometimes it'll ask you clarifying questions about what it needs to do with this, but when it does, you basically just let it cook. You go and you drop in the next one. And that's basically how I went from a single Electron app to this monorepo approach. Everything is split up into separate libs. Everything is split up into separate apps. And now I have this application running in a web interface, which is going to connect to a REST API. I also have this running an Electron app right now. And then eventually I'll be able to do a volume mount to actually secure what applications or what directories Claude Code and Codex has access to. Now, I will say that even after you make this plan, there's going to be stuff that it misses. You will have to come through and you have to keep on reprompting, but at least this plan can help get you to that 70 or 80%, maybe even 90% of completion. And then you just come through and you kind of just shepherd it through to the finish line. And it's very, very thorough because you have context windows when it comes to chatting with LLMs. And if you just dump all this into your terminal at once, it's going to blow through your context window super fast. And so it's good to basically drop these in one at a time, make sure it analyzes what it's doing. Maybe you can compact it before you drop in the next one. And you just keep doing that process. And you're going to have a really nice state at the end of that. All right, that's really all I want to share with you in this video is, some of my strategies I like to do with doing larger refactorings. If you did like this, leave a comment or like the video. Other than that, be sure to check out my Agentic Jumpstart course. And by the way, if you do join the course, you will have early access to Automaker. I do plan to make this open source soon with my community. But for right now, we're keeping it kind of locked down. We want to make sure it's polished before we release it out there and before people start posting hundreds of GitHub issues and we can't maintain it anymore. So other than that, hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good day and happy coding.